Hey, guess what, everybody? Go listen to the Break It Down show.
Hey, that's true, and you should. And if you know who said that, send us an email. See if you get it right. And if you like the show and want to support it, it's really easy to do. Just keep listening, tell your friends to listen, and share links. Like us on Facebook, we're Break It Down Show. Follow us on Twitter, @Break It Down Show. And give us some 5-star written reviews on iTunes or Stitcher. In fact, if you email us a screenshot of your awesome review, we'll mention you on the show and send you some swag with our new logo designed for us by Dee. He's an awesome dude and graphic artist in San Francisco's Dog Patch. And if you want his info, reach out to us. Now for the show. Dr. Robert Greenberg has been referred to as the Elvis of music history and appreciation. I prefer to say he is to classical music what Neil deGrasse Tyson is to science. He breaks it down so we all can relate to the emotions, the stories, and the personalities, which, for me, qualifies him as this generation's custodian of classical music. I mean that to sound as heavy as it does. He tosses aside all the pretentious bullshit so we can recognize the Tupac in Mozart, the Rock Hudson in Tchaikovsky, and the Rick Rubin in Beethoven. Pete became familiar with him through his many lectures for the Great Courses, which you can find at thegreatcourses.com. And you can find links to a bunch of his stuff on our website, breakitdownshow.com. He got his BA in music, magna cum laude, from Princeton, and his PhD in composition with distinction from UC Berkeley. From there, he's gone on to do a lot. You can read all about it at robertgreenbergmusic.com, and you should. But the latest is that he's on Aura TV with a terrific series of punchy shorts called Scandalous Overtures, where he talks about the sex, drugs, murder, and mayhem among the great composers. No shit. He's been interviewed by Larry King, but not like he was interviewed by me and Pete. He's a composer, a teacher, a friend of the show, and as it turns out, a bit of a comedian, and a musical badass. He's Dr. Robert Greenberg, and he's on the Break It Down show. Enjoy it. We are in Mindseed Soundstage with Dr. Robert Greenberg. Can we call you Dr. Bob?
Oh, yes, please.
I like Dr. Bob.
Dr. Bob.
That's what my students used to call me at the conservatory.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. There are a few things that you've talked about that we love that are out there, and everybody can go look. If you guys just Google Robert Greenberg, and you'll find a lot of stuff. The Great Courses.
A lot of dentists.
You'll find, yes,
plastic surgeons.
Perhaps a tax attorney or two.
All the people that my parents wanted me to be instead of a musician, yes.
Now,
where did you get that right?
Well, let's start at the beginning. It's funny that you said your parents gave you piano lessons since you were a small child.
Right.
And then were just flabbergasted when you told them that you decided to pursue a career in music.
Right. And it wasn't just my piano lessons. You know, my grandmother was a professional pianist who graduated from what is now the Juilliard School in 1916. My other grandmother was a professional actress in New York and did a lot of movies, a lot of Broadway. So theater and music was a birthright of mine, and I was expected to play the piano. And when I told my parents I was majoring in music, they were flabbergasted, is a kind way to put it.
Wow.
They were really pissed. And I still remember my mother saying to me, "We send you to college to major in music?" And I'm thinking, why did you do all of this stuff for all these years then and give me all this positive reinforcement? What was I supposed to do? Play the piano for the first 18 years of my life and then go into dentistry? I mean, give me a break. So, yeah, I did the music, and it's worked out just fine.
Did you know that the keyboard was your specialty when you started your collegiate career, or were you considering horns or something?
Oh, no. I was just a piano player.
Just piano. Okay.
You know, these people who can play well on multiple instruments are really few and far between, and they're miraculous. It's enough to learn how to play one instrument, even passingly, hard enough.
Right.
So I can't imagine having specialized in more than one to the degree that I could call myself a pro.
Is that true in your genre? Because there's a lot of people in the current popular music that are multi-instrumentalists.
Right.
Like Prince can play anything.
Right. But Prince is playing his own music.
Right.
He's not playing very difficult sonatas by Beethoven on the piano and then transitioning to the violin and playing Brahms and playing stuff written by other people that really is very technically difficult to play. And the other thing about rock and roll and jazz, and my background is in jazz, I mean, that's how I sell myself as a piano player. You're improvising 95% of the time. Of course, you're improvising on chords and scales and given structures, but you're still improvising. You can kind of make it up as you go along, and there's no really wrong notes. There's just lesser and better choices.
You can bury a wrong note in artistic license.
Oh, don't you know it? That's what I felt. That's what I heard. But if you play a wrong note in Beethoven, you're a slob.
Right. Yeah, it is, I think, a different thing. Not only that he's playing his own music, but he's playing he's playing a style that is not so technically demanding. And I think what attracts Pete and myself to you is that you've taken what is, because that's what makes classical music so much less approachable, I think, to people our age, is that it's not in the mainstream. We're not inundated with it, for one thing. But for another thing, from a musical standpoint, you and I talked before we started rolling, and I admitted to you that I call myself a musician in front of almost anybody, and I hesitate to say the word in front of you, but it's that amount of discipline required to play a composition that has stood the test of time, and that has very, very particular parameters in which you have to interpret the music. Mm-hmm. So what do you think it takes to bring a new ear to classical music that you can take that barrier down and say, no, don't worry about the technical part of it. Don't be intimidated by that. Is that the challenge? I
think there's a lot of challenges. And I'm going to backtrack just a little bit, if you don't mind. Mm-hmm. I've always said, and I do believe this to be true, so I keep saying it, that there's basically two big chunks of music out there. Uh-huh. There's the music we grew up listening to and playing when we were teenagers, and then there's everything else. Now, the music we grew up listening to when we were teenagers was, in my case, jazz and rock and roll.
Okay.
And these are both unscripted musics. These are both conversational musics. They're both originally American musics. And to the metaphoric degree that I can make statements like this, they reflect a kind of plurality of thinking. They're democratized musics where everyone gets to contribute what they want to contribute.
Yes.
Jazz and rock and roll would not have evolved in 18th century Europe. It couldn't.
Yeah.
This was a structured society. Musicians were working class people who did what they were told to do. So back to the rock and roll and jazz stuff in our teen years, this is music that we not only identify with ourselves culturally, but it's the music we identify with our sexual coming of age, with the girls or whomever we dated at the time. I mean, everything that's wrapped up in who we are.
I'll say.
So that's cool. And it might seem difficult then to say, well, why should I find a piece of music written in 1785 attractive or interesting? And my response would be, first of all, it's music. Second of all, we're all people. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter where we were born, when we were born, how we were born. Music is music, simply put. And a game I play, a game you probably heard me play in one of my other interviews, is folks always, or frequently folks say to me, well, I should listen to this old stuff. Mm-hmm. Every now and then I point out that their sexual apparatus that gives them so much pleasure is really much older than the music I'm talking about in terms of its structure, but we won't go there right now. Instead, I use my lifetime equivalent. My dad is 89, so I figure at very least 90 is a good life.
Right.
And then you string together 3 lifetimes, born, die, born, die, born, die, 270 years.
Right.
That's just 3 human lifetimes ago. All right. 270 years ago, it was 1744. Bach was alive and well and working in Leipzig. Haydn was 12 years old. George Washington was 12 years old. Mozart isn't going to be born for another 12 years. Beethoven's not going to be born for another 26 years. The music of our concert repertoire is
not that old.
It's not that old, and it comes from a culture, a Euro culture, undergoing the Enlightenment, an increasingly democratized culture, where people kind of thought the way we think. All right, we're a lot better about a lot of things than they were, particularly when it comes to race and gender.
Sure.
But ideally, and of course everything's an ideal, ideally the ideals of that time were not terrifically foreign to ours, and people behaved the way we behave. So I have no qualms about saying this is contemporary music. Mozart is contemporary music. So my job is simply to paint a picture of the man and the environment that allows you to tap into his life, to tap into his world, and to hear his music through the ears of his contemporaries. I bring up Mozart randomly, but as a matter of fact, the image we have of him today is as the quintessential exponent of his style. But in actuality, he was a man on the outs. He was fairly unsuccessful in his own time. His music was considered too complicated, too long, too many notes. That's the old famous quote. So, in point of fact, Mozart was not the rock star of his time. Mozart was not a popular composer in his time. He was a fascinating individual who pushed the boundaries and whose music still has as much to offer us today as it had when he wrote it.
Well, not unlike when Amadeus was... let's see that Amadeus won Best Picture in 84.
84.
And then there was a bit of interest in classical music, and people started to pay attention to it a little bit. So I think what has captured our attention is that you are sort of breathing that life into classical music by exposing the flaws, foibles, all the interesting stuff of these composers. So when you mention that Mozart was not the rock star of his day, and that goes counter to the movie, but never mind the liberties that they've taken to make a good movie.
Because we don't call it Amadeus. We simply say that movie.
That movie.
That movie.
Yeah.
Yes. Along with that other movie, Immortal Beloved, which presumably is about Beethoven. Or that movie, Impromptu, which is presumably about Chopin. Hugh Grant is Chopin. Give me breaks. Listen, Hollywood is in business to tell stories. And if the facts get in the way, then the heck with the facts.
Right, absolutely.
And that's okay. This is the big question. Should a movie like Amadeus be promulgated as truth if it brings more attention to the music? I mean, where's the role it should play culturally? And that's a tough one for me, too, because if it raises interest, that's fantastic. If it raises interest for the wrong reasons, who am I to say? But if it creates a bad image, if it makes Mozart a horse-laughing idiot savant, which he was not, then that's not fair either.
Right.
Once you're dead, people can say whatever they want about you, and it's the anarchy of the living over the dead, and there's nothing we can do about that, especially when it comes to Hollywood and stories like this. But my job is to try to tell a better story and to supplement that story, to make sure that the music is the lead in that story, so that while we're understanding the person, we're comprehending the music as both a reflection of that person's personality and a reflection of the environment.
Of the time,
yeah,
sure.
Absolutely.
You tell fascinating stories. So if our listeners are getting their first exposure here, then we won't feel bad if you stop this podcast and you go and listen to the great courses, or
go to aura.tv.
Or go to aura.tv, because your series there is wonderfully interesting and colorful, and all these things, by the way, are very easily digestible because they're about 8 or 9 minutes long.
Yeah, the aura pieces are short.
And with the Mozart piece, there was plenty of fascinating stuff in there. His ability to compose an entire piece in his head, and the fact that it was just a formality for him to get it down on paper. Yeah. I mean, what a shame. God only knows what we'd never got.
Yeah, dead 4 weeks before his 36th birthday, so 35 still. Yeah, there's a lot of tragic young lives, not that there aren't today, but, in the 17th, 18th, 19th centuries.
It was tough to stay alive.
Yeah, it was tough to stay alive is right.
Yeah.
And
well, the other thing about the story that was fascinating was the piece that you did talk about where his wife had to tell him stories to keep him awake.
Yeah, Don Giovanni.
And as he nodded off and needed to be nudged and told a story, and then finally his wife just let him sleep a couple hours.
Yeah.
And he still made the deadline in the morning.
Yeah, that was the overture to Don Giovanni. See, the opera in Mozart's day was very much like the entertainment industry today, and what I mean by that is television and movies.
Yeah.
Things have to happen very quickly once they start to happen. And you'd have just a few months to compose a whole opera.
Right.
And you'd go into rehearsals, and you'd still be composing. And the overture would always be, that is the musical, the instrumental introduction that would begin such a production, was always the last thing to be written. And Mozart, God bless him, would wait till the night or day before the opening performance, because he would say, I got to see how it's going. I just have to see how it feels before I can write this thing. But that put tremendous pressure on him.
Yeah.
So he's sitting there writing out parts. He didn't even have time to write out scores. So he wouldn't write. Usually you'd write out a score, a full score that has everything on it.
Right, and break the parts down around that.
Exactly. And then you give it to a copyist or a bunch of copyists, and the copyists, copy out the parts. But Mozart was such a freak that he figured, we'll do it reverse. We'll assemble the score later. I'll just write out the parts out of my head.
Wow.
And that's what he would do for whole movements of instrumental music, for whole orchestral movements of music. He would write out the parts, and then they'd assemble the score later. And he wouldn't need it because he was doing the conducting, and he knew how it went. There were times with his piano concerti where he'd do the same thing. He would maybe write out the parts for the orchestra, but he wouldn't have time to write out his own part, so he would just play his own part out of his head.
That is amazing.
Oh, no, he was an alien. He was an alien. I hate to say that because it relieves him of any human responsibility for his actions, but he had capabilities that really kind of freak us out to this day.
Does he have a musical peer anywhere that has any kind of ability on par with that?
Franz Schubert had a kind of ease of composing that was very much like Mozart. Arnold Schoenberg, a great Viennese-born, moved to the United States composer of the late 19th and 20th centuries, had that kind of facility. Felix Mendelssohn had that kind of facility. So yeah, different people had like facilities, but I don't think anyone put it together into a whole package the way Mozart did. And if you would have looked at him, you wouldn't have even given him the time of day. 5'2", 5'3", very pale, pudgy, short fingers, bad, thinnish, blondish hair, which he was constantly covering up with wigs, kind of pop-eyed, not a beautiful person, and not physically imposing in any way, no way to match up the physique with the skill, until, of course, he'd sit down at the piano and then start doing absurd things. So just a fascinating package.
Because panty dropping's always been panty dropping.
Yeah,
played a good job.
That's right. I was just thinking, now that's rock star behavior. The rock star behavior that people associate with fast living. What I was fascinated with by the story that you just told was his pressure. And that, to me, is the rock star lifestyle, where you're just going to lay it on the line. You have everybody's coming tomorrow. The show's tomorrow. You're still rehearsing something tonight. That makes him more fascinating.
Well, but that's a lot. We say classical music, and we think about this very staid Euro establishment of musicians behaving a certain way. Musicians are musicians. Mm-hmm. I mean, you want to call it rock star mentality, I'm happy to call it, but then let's say everybody.
Yeah.
No one's not a rock star mentality.
Yeah.
Everyone's under deadlines all the time. Everyone has to produce all the time. I mean, if you want to compare Mozart to a rock star, I always compare him to Tupac.
Yeah.
Because he was at the very edge. He pissed a lot of people off. As many people hated him as liked him. He loved his bling. He ran with a very rough crowd, and he died very young and tragically young. I'm not sure I would call Tupac a rock star. He was a gangsta. Yeah. But a lot of these people are like that, You
just compared Mozart to Tupac.
I did, and I think it's a sound comparison.
I'm tweeting that right now.
So now I think the most obvious question that people want to know is your opinion of what is going to last. And Larry King asked you if there were any artists. So you guys just have to go watch the Larry King interview because it's terrific.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask the question a different way because I know how you answered it. But when you see an artist now composing things that you think can have a life in other people's interpretation as generations go past, do you think there are any artists who have a consistent pattern of what you think are really strong works along those lines?
Are we talking about the more pop world right now or the more composed world? I mean, what's called literate music, concert music versus...
Yeah. Well, I'd like to know if there are any popular artists who are doing anything like that, but anybody who you think in our generation is creating the type of music that is going to have legs.
Well, I fear you say our generation. You're being very kind, John. Thank you. Very kind. I fear I'm a generation beyond you. I wear it fairly well, but I'm 60 now. So, my great rock and roll days were back in the mid 60s and the very early 70s. And that's when it stopped. Yeah. But I would respond quickly, but from two different points of view. What I said in my interview with Larry King, which, by the way, is on that Aura.tv.
Aura.tv.
Yank it up on your computer.
Yeah.
Or on your Apple TV. He asked me what popular music, what rock and roll of our time. And he's 80, so he's of another generation that's going to last. And my response was, the stuff that's going to last is the stuff that can be interpreted by people other than the ones who introduced it. So the comparison I love is, and I think it's a stable comparison, is Satisfaction by the Stones, which came out when I was, about 12 years old or something. I love that song. But no one else can sing that song.
Yeah, that's a Stones tune.
It's a Stones tune because it's dependent upon their performance. Mm-hmm. It cannot be interpreted by others. You're not going to hear jazz versions of Satisfaction. Right. You're not going to hear country versions of Satisfaction. You're not going to hear orchestral arrangements of Satisfaction. There's not enough harmonic and melodic material that new life can be breathed into it different ways.
Well, I'm sure that we've all walked in on a wedding where some band was playing Satisfaction and it doesn't work.
Well, top 40 bands. I've done a lot of that gigging in my time, too.
Yeah, but I'm sure we've also walked in on bands that were playing Girl from Ipanema or Baubles, Bangles, and Beads where it did work.
Right, or Beatles songs.
Yeah.
Lennon-McCartney songs are very transferable because they have the properties of high-end harmonic and melodic material that stand beyond performance style. As far as who the contemporary literate composers are, well, now this is going to sound terrible, but I'll say it anyway. I'm a really good composer. I've been writing music since I was a little kid. Every other year I spend composing a piece or two pieces, and I get them played, and I just had a major premiere last spring. I just had another big performance in October of a trio that I'd written and that has been performed many times. I'd like to think that if this music got out, it would be enjoyed and it would have some legs. The problem is, how do you get this kind of music out in our world today?
Yeah.
Record companies aren't doing new music anymore.
They're not doing new music.
No. So you have to become a vanity publisher. You have to publish your own stuff. You have to have a YouTube channel. Right. But the vehicles aren't there. The big performing organizations, operas, orchestras, they don't do new music anymore.
Yeah.
Their boards, their patrons don't want to hear it. And the folks that keep these organizations alive with their pocketbooks and their wallets and their checkbooks don't want to hear new music. And so it's a tough one. There's a lot of really fine music being written right now. I'm very involved in the new music community.
Well, do you think that literate music, as you put it, is dying a slow death because of it?
No, I think what we have is this fragmentation of the media, which is very much a 20th and now 21st century phenomenon.
Right.
Electronic media has changed everything.
Well, let me put it in this context, and then I'll ask you the question that relates that way. I heard, and I'm going to screw this up, but something along the lines of every 2 weeks, we create as much content as was created from the dawn of humanity to 1974. In just the form of all of the, blogs and YouTube videos. Gotcha. And if you just cram together all of the information that we're recording, podcasts.
But some podcasts are better than others.
Well, you better believe we would hope. Oh, yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. No, I'm sure you're right.
Yeah, but if we're going down that track, and we can assume that that's only going to be more and more information, what do you think that does to the art form? I mean, it's fragmented it for sure. Do you think that we are actually going to capture and keep more pieces of work, though?
I hope so. It depends what mood you catch me in. If I'm feeling optimistic, and generally I am optimistic, we haven't even started to work out how, as a culture, how, as a consuming public, how we're going to handle all this information, how we're going to process it. I get on my exercise bike and I turn on the TV sitting in front of me. I have 700 channels. Do I have to tell you how often I can't find anything to watch?
Right.
Yeah, we're all in the same boat. Yeah.
Right. All of this stuff, and yet, what do I want?
Yeah, right.
So we haven't figured it out yet, have we? I do think that people who are interested in art music, and that isn't meant to sound hoity-toity, it's just a way of referring to a certain kind of music versus other kinds, will find paths to it, and those paths will be made available. There always will be people who are going to be interested in this music. It's wonderful.
It's music.
It's
We're
music.
human beings.
And it's exciting, and it's new, and it's contemporary, and it's fresh, and there's always going to be a public for it. So the question becomes now how we find that public.
Right.
Concert series? Well, maybe not so much in the traditional sense. A concert series that is simulcast, a concert series that goes up immediately to YouTube, a
Right.
concert series that people can subscribe to on their computers. Well, yes, now we're talking.
Yeah.
I mean, for example, I'm part of a group called Composers, Inc., and we've been putting on new American music. That's all we do for 32 years. We're in our 32nd season now. We're one of the most important organizations in the United States doing what we do. And people can subscribe to our series, and right now we're at the First Congregational Church in Berkeley. Beautiful performance venue. Really, one of these days, hopefully sooner than later, we have to figure out a way to be simulcasting what we do.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So that folks outside of the Bay Area, folks outside of Berkeley, can tune in and hear these amazing performances of this remarkable new music. So this is how we have to think about using the technology to break barriers that exist right now. And that's why I'm generally optimistic, because I do believe there's an audience
You
for
should
all
be
this stuff.
optimistic. There's a lot going on with that. We're actually probably going to interview a guy that shot an entire feature film on an iPhone. So it's not hard to broadcast your stuff out. It is hard to gather that audience, but that audience is there if you can do the social media thing well enough to gather it. And instead of trying to compete with the opera houses, because they, as you know, in musical history, it compresses time. So you have Bach, who is now a peer of Rachmaninoff, and they never played together, and they never saw each other, but their music is all in the same bucket.
Right.
150, 200 years of music, maybe up to like Scott Joplin. If people know who Scott Joplin is, then it kind of shifts and goes on in the more the modern thing. And so, you try to name 15 composers from before 1950, it's very difficult to pick out any artist because time just compresses those guys, and only a couple can survive. So it's better to social media and broadcast that stuff out and let the people come in through those social media connections, and then so you can find your foothold there and then make that music matter, because music does matter, and it is going to survive because it pulls out the emotions that make you think about your girlfriend from that one year. Or
I'm affected by what you said earlier on when we first started, and I wonder how different my life would be if my sexual coming of age had a soundtrack by Beethoven.
Yeah. Well,
I probably would have attracted a whole different population of chicks.
This is very true, but then again, you would have been hanging out in 18th century Vienna, 19th century, early 19th century Vienna. Yes, a very different demographic. You think about the population that supported these composers that now we call great. I mean, Vienna had a population of maybe 80 or 90,000 people.
Wow.
And Haydn and Mozart and Beethoven and Schubert, they're all living in there at the same time. I don't know what the world population was at the time, but maybe 400 or 500 million people. Mm-hmm. I mean, we're billions now. It was probably not even that big. And unlike then, now pretty much anyone on the planet can access pretty much anything, except those unfortunates in North Korea who've been blacked out. Yes. But what I'm saying is that the possible audience base as it exists today is so much more massive, incomprehensibly bigger than anything that ever existed, that the fragmentation we're witness to shouldn't be a big problem. Because the pie is so much bigger, all right, so it's being cut into more smaller pieces. But the pie is so much bigger in terms of how many people there are. I mean, you look at what's going on in China now, and the growing middle class in China, and the westernization of their education. It's unbelievable. how many fans of Western music there are in China. And we here in the West are becoming more attuned to traditional Chinese music. And so we're interacting now at a level that was impossible half a generation ago.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I'm very enthused by all these possibilities. I'm very enthused by them. It's an exciting time, and we won't know how this plays out for a couple of 100 years yet. Our technology is still so young.
Yeah.
I mean, we were dying of strep infections.
Cholera.
In 1930. I mean, you know, my dad was alive when there was no antibiotics. So really, technologically, we're still babies, and we haven't figured out how to use any of this stuff yet, and it's going to play out in its own way.
Yeah.
Larry King did an interview with another music maker on the Aura.tv network, and he was a little more negative about the future of music. He declared that music will be dead in 20 years.
Who is this?
Rick Hall. But what he was saying was that there's no money in it, and we used to all get in a room together, 16 of us, and make music, and George would have the licks. We'd build the song off of George's lick. But now everybody can have a computer, and they can have Pro Tools, and they can play the instruments themselves and go in their basement and just do whatever they want, and there's no money in it.
What an old fuddy-duddy.
What an old fuddy-duddy.
Yeah, and then John and I are like, just like before.
Just like before. I mean, really, the way that he described what was wrong with music was that the lack of collaboration that came from the fact that a guy could sit down with a computer and create an entire piece all by himself, much like Mozart did right in his head before he scribed it on paper. So how is it different? And what do you feel about, how do you use technology to help you write?
Well, thank you for asking that question. I'm an old fuddy-duddy. I mean, I fell in love with my number one pencils and my Passantino music notebooks when I was a kid, and I still use notebooks and pencil, and I do everything at my piano by ear. I have a drawing table next to my piano. I have a beautiful concert grand Steinway. A D is the model.
Wow.
So when I'm composing, I get to sit and play for 10, 12 hours a day, which is as great a pleasure as I can have. And only then, once a piece is finished, do I enter it into a program called Finale. And Finale has something called Garriton Instruments, so it's a really good synthesizing program. And you can hear very clearly what you've done. And I find that this has been very helpful to me. I put up a big fight about moving to Finale. I used to have other people copy my stuff out. But it's great being able to hear what you wrote, providing you don't use it as a crutch, because sometimes I hear things I don't like, and then I can go back and fix them before the first rehearsal. Because it used to be you had to fix them after the first rehearsal, which ticks the players off, because, you know, once you hand me a piece, you better know what you want, because you're asking me to spend my time learning it.
Yep, right.
You got to show respect. Have to show respect.
Yeah.
But, you know, there are other dynamics, and I'm trying to recall who was telling me about this just within the last 2 weeks. But apparently, there are feeds being developed now that are being made available by Google that are virtually instantaneous at some gigantic sampling rate. And the demonstration that this person had seen was there was a cellist in New York. I'm just making this up, but basically it's the point. There was a cellist in New York and a violinist in Los Angeles and a violist in Houston and another violinist in Chicago, and they sat there playing a string quartet together, and because the feed was instantaneous, they were hearing the information from each other as if they were sitting around this table.
Wow.
And they were able to make coherent music as if they were in each other's presence.
Right.
All right, so maybe Mr. Hall is going to have to do a feed like that. And you can be playing with players all over the freaking planet. They don't have to be in the same room. Now, it's more fun when you're in the same room and you can drink together and so forth. But that doesn't preclude 3 people from being in the room, and someone else, the licks you're playing off of, is somewhere else. It just, the music-making process isn't changing. The way we go about it will change, but the process is still the same.
And that's always been true.
It's always been true,
yes. Regardless of the tool, somebody will figure out a way to use it as a crutch. Let's discard those folks and concentrate on the people who are using whatever technology it is to enhance the process that brings about the creativity.
Right. See, if I'm this guy, what upsets me, and this is where I understand where he's coming from, he got into a world, he got into a business, he figured he could make a living doing A, B, and C. And now technology has pulled the rug out from under him. He can't do A, B, and C. This is his life. This is his world. It doesn't work that way anymore. He can't make a living at it.
Right.
And that's, I mean, what's worse? What's worse, spending your whole life developing an expertise at something and then finding out that technology has rendered you semi-obsolete? Not entirely, but semi.
Right.
Yeah. Well, it's no different than if he were a cobbler or a blacksmith or anything else.
Yeah, these are all trades, and music is a trade.
That's right. And that obsolescence is based on a set of tools. And if it requires a new set of tools, then there are plenty of people who had blacksmith expertise who maybe aren't shoeing horses anymore, but they figured out how to instead do whatever it is they could apply that knowledge to. And I think what I'm hearing from you is that there is still a life for a true composer.
Oh, absolutely. And right, music's not dead. The music industry, as he knew it, is changing.
Right.
But music will never be dead. Music is something we do instinctively. It's something that helps us organize ourselves. It's something that allows us to deepen and extend the language instinct into something much greater than language itself. Mm-hmm. We're hardwired to make music. It's a very potent human, I don't even know it's as natural to us as eating and reproducing and walking and as necessary.
Yeah, and love. I mean, it all kind of goes together like that. And also, another thing we're hardwired for is greatness. So there's someone somewhere who has heard music from somebody. We'll just say Johnny Cash. And they're in their little laboratory with their computer and their Pro Tools. And they're doing like what Mozart did with Haydn with string quartets, where he's like, I've got to write these for you. And they're the best things I can write. And then he basically made that genre obsolete at that one time because he reached such a height of that. And there's someone out there doing that right now.
Well, not obsolete. He just raised the bar.
Okay,
Mozart raised the bar so that when Beethoven came along, Beethoven wasn't looking at Haydn. Beethoven was looking at Mozart's version of Haydn.
Right.
And then the next guy comes along, or the next woman comes along, and she looks at Beethoven. And that's how styles evolve. You find something that turns you on, and then you do your own version of it. And everything is constantly metamorphosing. But it doesn't mean anything becomes obsolete. It means it evolves.
What did a fugue become today? What's the progeny of a fugue?
A fugue.
Just
a fugue, yeah. A fugue. It's like saying a bug. A bug. It's still a bug. It might have, an extra leg or two, but it's still a bug.
All right.
Well, now that you've said that, what about the old compositions that remain? And, if we're to breathe new life, here I am adopting your mission. If we're to breathe new life into these compositions by exposing them to younger and younger ears, it's sort of counter to what you just said in that we have to create new music to expose those younger ears to better stuff. How is it these things get any better?
I would never say better. I would say different. Evolve. Listen, a Bach fugue doesn't need to have life breathed into it. It's already alive. Mm-hmm. It's beautiful. It's magnificent. It's a glorious example of its time and place and of this guy who couldn't write a bad piece. If you held a gun to his head, He couldn't write a bad piece. So it's not a matter of saying, we need to breathe life into this. It's simply a matter of exposing someone to what this piece means, what it sounds like, and then letting them groove to it. Now, if we're talking about how these genres like fugue evolve, well, then that's easy enough to talk about because, if I write something that's fugal, I wrote a piece for piano called Fugit. Excuse me. But I did. The pianist who commissioned this piece, a guy named Lino Rivera, is an incredible piano player. And we agreed on about a 7 or 8 minute piece. It was going to be very exciting because it was a celebration piece. But he said, it has to have a fugue in it. I want you to write me a fugue. So obviously it's not going to sound like Bach. I don't use Bach's tonal language. I use a much more abstract, self-generated tonal language. But there's certain things about a fugue that are recognizable, each voice coming in turn and creating that kind of wedge-like stack of melodic ideas, and then episodes that transfer you to different places than the main fugue subject comes back here and there. So he was pretty happy with his fugue, and that's why I called the piece Fugit. And my favorite title, everyone's favorite title is one called Foreplay, which is for a quartet. And everyone wants to call up one of their pieces Foreplay. But it was done by a guy named Milton Babbitt. And it really screwed everyone up because, you're always trying to come up with some title that folks remember that's just as vaguely obscene but not quite.
Yeah.
So Fugit was it. And
I think it works.
So that was my take on a contemporary take on what is an old style of writing. Yeah, this brings up, and it brings up the basic issue, the difference between literate music or concert music and more improvisational musics, and that is, you're always playing from a script.
Right.
The script might have been written in 1740, the script might have been written in 1806, the script might have been written in 2014, but it's still a script. And so you have to understand it against its time and place. And then that's the key. It's always the key, is making a time and place seem interesting and convincing people that the way this music sounds is a reflection of that time and place.
Yeah, that's a great segue into talking a little bit about your show on Aura.tv. One of the questions, as John and I prepped to have you on, was what do we want to ask you? Because there's so many things, and we know we could just turn you on and then leave you alone an hour easy. Boy. Fugit.
That was a compliment on your verbosity.
It's okay. I like to think of myself as the energizer talker.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and you are, and I do need to thank you for that, but I'll do that in a minute. Your ability to dang it, I lost my train of thought.
Aura TV.
Aura TV, okay. Your show on Aura.tv is great. We were trying to think of what could we ask you, and one of the things is who's the Marilyn Manson of that day? And who was the Jim Morrison? Who's got a bottle of whiskey, and who knows what's going to happen? And lo and behold, you have this show. It's exactly what we wanted to hear about. Can you talk a little bit about where you got the idea for the show? And then you've got 8-minute segments. In Mozart, you could do 80 8-minute segments.
It's true.
So how do you decide what to do, and what's the roadmap?
Well, it was really very cool. I have a blog. I have a Facebook fan page, and I haven't been writing as enthusiastically on that blog as I used to, but I used to do 2 or 3 pieces a week. And I got an email just exactly a year ago, because last December, Mozart died on December 5th or 6th. I forget the date exactly. I think it was the 6th. And I wrote a blog about his death. And I get an email from this guy. He says, listen, I'm the CEO of something called Aura TV. Look it up. I've been a fan of yours for years. I'm reading your blog. This is great. We need to make a program out of this. He loved the idea of the conspiracy to kill Mozart. He says, is there enough stuff out there to do conspiracies against composers? I said, no, but there's enough stuff out there to find all kinds of...
enough dirt to dig up.
Oh, don't you know it?
Yeah.
This is, once we're dead, all the stuff we were hoping no one would know about comes out.
Oh, my goodness. Like letters from the old days, but now we've got everything in text and email.
Yeah.
It's going to be epic for the folks 200 years from now.
Oh, we've got photos. We've got
video.
We got videos, man. I mean, we've got medical records. Yes, nothing is going to escape future biographers. And so we, over about a month's time, we put this together. And came up with this idea of, originally the title of the show was this ridiculously long thing, Conspiracies, Peccadillos, and Dirty Little Secrets, fun and games with the great composers.
Yeah.
They came up with the Scandalous Overtures, which is a much better title.
I think Scandalous Overtures is just complicated enough to make it be about classical music. But you did mention that long title.
I did in the Larry King interview, because we did that interview in May.
Yeah.
And that was before they had changed the title, and while the pieces were still in production.
Boy, I'm glad you changed the title.
Me too. Yeah. Well, these are smart people. It's wonderful working with smart people.
Again, a great segue. So you drank wine with William Shatner.
I did. I would rather have had a martini. But... yeah, the whole premise of his show, isn't this amazing? Is there anyone out there who doesn't have a talk show now? The whole
You're looking at people.
John and Pete have one.
Right.
We can have one.
Anybody can have one.
The premise of his show is that he has a bottle of wine in a brown bag, and whomever is his guest tastes the wine and then tries to equate that person's career and what that person does in the world to the wine.
With the wine.
Problem was that the wine he gave me was this big, fat, sweet white wine, the kind of which I would never ordinarily want to drink, except maybe for dessert. So
you said as much.
Yeah, I couldn't come up with anything.
Yeah.
Except that, my wife would really like this. And then I'm thinking, okay,
he poured you a chick wine.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm thinking, all right, every woman in the world is going to be angry at me for saying something that can be perceived as being,
Yeah.
You know, just as many people disliked Tupac and Mozart as liked him. So
I know, but I can't afford to alienate anybody yet. Give me about 15 years.
Now you got to give yourself some credit, and if you won't do it, we will. But you are great at what you do.
Thank you.
You truly are.
Thank you.
So one of the things that John and I love about people who are artists, especially musical people, we really love the guys that help us get some action, like Harry Connick Jr. All you got to do is buy tickets.
That guy's gotten me laid so many times.
Easy, game over.
Yeah.
Dwayne here at Mindseed with Tony.
Why didn't you tell me that when I could have used that?
That guy's gotten me laid 44 times.
He sings us. They were so smart. It's a pop group, and they wrote a song about anniversaries. It's our anniversary. How you cannot fail with that. You just put that on, like, hey, baby.
Yep.
You know, I'm learning all this stuff.
He's going somewhere with this.
Yeah, I want to hear where it's going because I'm learning about all this, and it's too late.
No. Well, you give the gift too, and I don't know if you realize this. And this is.
I've been responsible for you getting laid. Now this I want to hear.
Absolutely. So,
don't we all?
I already love the opera. I already just my dad I told you he's got a degree in music, and so we grew up going to shows, that kind of thing. But you made it accessible, and so here's what that does. I get to take tickets to my chick and say, hey, we're going to go to the opera. You've got to get dressed up, which they love. We've got to go out to a fancy meal while you're dressed up, which they love. They go, and the stories are incredible. Just the love stories. My favorite aria is in Don Giovanni when, I forget which one of his scorned women is like, I hate you, I despise you, but I cannot stop loving you. And she sings her heart out right there. And you just look at your girl.
Donna Elvira.
Exactly. Yeah. She sings, and it's beautiful. The time, everything about it is great. How she sings it, how it's written, when it's just great. And that right there is the moneymaker, the closer. So you put me in that room with my chick, with all those things added up, and it's game over.
Love it.
Thank you.
Look at that.
Love it.
You got Pete laid.
I'll take it. Yeah,
I got to get me some opera tickets.
You got to get you some Don Giovanni, dude.
Well, okay. So then make some suggestions. Don Giovanni.
I was going to say there's some operas. I can tell you the ones that aren't going to work.
Yeah.
Like Salome.
Okay.
It ends with her, tongue kissing the cut off head of John the Baptist and getting blood all over her face, and then the king being so disgusted by this that he has her crushed under the shields of his bodyguard. So that won't work.
Not really a turn on.
That's not gonna get you anywhere. Yeah. Electra's not gonna do much for you either. Rossini, The Barber of Seville, that'll get you going. Mozart's Don Giovanni, A Così fan tutte by Mozart.
That's fun.
It's about a couple of girls who have boyfriends who are convinced that there's no way his particular girlfriend could ever sleep with someone else, so they make a bet that they'll each come back in disguise and try to seduce the other one's girlfriend, both convinced that their girl is going to stay loyal, and neither one does.
Universal human stories.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. But of course, the beauty of that particular opera is it's the guys who are the jerks.
Yeah.
Because they're the ones who put these lovely young ladies in this impossible position.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah.
I love The Marriage of Figaro. It's almost like the writers from Cheers and all those great TV shows. They just copied off of that. You're like, what hilarious, zany, impossible thing is going to happen next?
What goes around comes around. There really is nothing that anyone has written since at least Roman comedy that's changed.
Right.
It's, people are people. And we do stupid things, especially when it comes to money and sex. And it's all the same.
Yeah.
I wish that our audience could see the knowing look that Pete and I gave each other when Dr. Bob said, we all do some stupid things when it comes to money and sex.
I'm still looking my
Wait a
Yeah,
minute.
right.
It's Tuesday. Anyway, I'm curious what bands and what music you listen to in your coming of age. What were you into back then?
Oh, it was the same stuff everyone was. Beatles and Stones, and then a little bit later Led Zeppelin, Jimi Hendrix for sure. Wasn't a fan of Janis Joplin, wasn't a fan. Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. And then Crosby, Stills and Nash. I loved it. That was about as close to country as I ever got. Some Grateful Dead, but not a lot. Early stuff like Working Man's Dead. Blood, Sweat, and Tears, loved it because it was a band. It was a band with a lot of jazz in it.
Right.
Same with
Chicago. Tower of Power.
Correct. Well, and Tower of Power. You're a local guy. Well, I'm not a local guy. I grew up on the East Coast.
Oh, okay.
And Tower of Power was one of the first things that made me aware of Oakland, California.
Yeah.
That and the Black Panthers and Hell's Angels. I'm thinking, whoa.
Fun.
Whoa, I gotta get me some of that Oakland stuff.
Going out there.
Some Oaktown stuff. Well, now I've been here for 36 years.
Yes.
So I'm not going anywhere
You
else.
heard it, everybody. Dr. Bob, veteran of the Biggity Oak.
I wish. I wish I'd been here during the... and not in South Jersey, which is where I'm from. It would have been fun to be here in the 60s and 70s. That would have been
South Jersey's lovely.
Compared to what? Compared to the fifth layer of hell? Excuse me.
I have great experiences with South Jersey. I don't want to digress.
I want to know your experiences.
He's calling you out. He's calling you out.
He is.
No,
I have a friend.
I want detail.
I'm gonna plug my friend Seth Cronemeyer, who's from Cherry Hill.
Cherry Hill, Route 38. I grew up about 20 minutes north of there.
Yeah, and and my friend Isa, who's from Maple Shade.
Okay.
Yeah. So
right.
I've crossed that
Pine Barrens.
Benjamin Franklin Bridge into Philadelphia, but I've gone out there at the right times of year and hung out with hospitable folks. It's easy for me to say, "Oh, that place is lovely," but I'm not leaving the Bay Area anytime soon.
No, you just. I'm not even going to go here. I can't go back.
Did you ever hear the Gilbert Godfrey joke where he said he was with his wife and she said, "I want you to kiss me where it stinks"? So I drove her to New Jersey.
I'll tell you a true story, though, about arrogance in New Jersey. And it's a true story, and it's apropos of nothing we've talked about, but we're having a good time, and I'm going to tell you this story. So I was a sophomore in college, and I was at Princeton, so about 30 miles north of where I grew up. And I was a music major, and I was an Ivy Leaguer, and I was very obnoxious because that's how you get before you learn any better. And my younger brother, back in Willingboro, was senior class president. And he calls me on the phone one day, and this would have been, 74. Calls me on the phone, he goes, "We've just hired a great band for the prom, and I'm getting your prom ticket, I want you to hear these guys." I said, "Steve, I'm a sophomore at Princeton, majoring in music.
Yeah.
I don't do prom bands anymore."
No.
He says,
"No, do not."
"Yes,
Don't
you know
dare.
where it's going. You know where it's going." It was the Bruce Springsteen band. And it was just before they took off.
Wow.
Just before they took off. And I could have gone and heard Springsteen at the beginning.
Yeah.
And instead, I was a jerk.
Well, we walked into this interview with heaping mounds of praise for Dr. Bob Greenberg, and he just made an ass of himself on our podcast.
It's all right. It was
Really
74.
appreciate that.
It was 74.
Who knew?
We can say it was long enough ago that
Does your brother still rub it in?
Oh, absolutely.
All right.
Absolutely. Why
Good
shouldn't
going. Good going.
When a younger brother has something like that,
Yeah,
you got to
absolutely.
use that till death.
Oh, man. That is amazing.
He's a high-end doc and all this, but I'll still put him down.
Yeah.
I'll still get my knees on his arms and start dribbling on him.
And I would think you especially could do like the typewriter on the chest, like a son of a bitch, like just
No, actually,
There's
probably things we can't say on radio, but
this isn't radio.
yeah, right.
Say titty twister.
Yeah, all right. I'm ashamed. But underneath every adult male is a 14-year-old boy still trying to get out. At least I believe that to be true, and my experience has proven it to be thus. So,
now that you've brought that up, we talked about the coming of age. Which pieces of work get us laid? Which pieces of work allow us to respond with our inner 14-year-old boy?
those were pieces that I probably wasn't listening to. I mean, you know, my impression of Black Sabbath and Ozzy Osbourne and anything that makes you lose consciousness, basically, would be it. But the music that made me insane at that point in my life was Errol Garner, jazz piano players, because this is when I was really getting into jazz. And when I'd hear a great swing, I would just go crazy. I'd just go absolutely mind-boggling. So for me, it was, the stuff that really made me crazy was great jazz, and jazz piano in particular.
Yeah.
So that's probably different from the acid or the gangsta that does it for a different bunch of people. But that's what did it to me.
Not a whole lot of 14-year-olds running around going, man, that Art Tatum.
Oh, well, Art Tatum's too scary. Art Tatum that guy is just too scary. You know, he can just do things at the piano that just, like, were not possible. You shouldn't have been able to do that.
Wow.
Let's not shortchange jazz for the gangsters it had. I mean, Miles Davis will pull a gun on you in a second.
Oh, yeah.
We learned that from Sly Stone.
We talked with Sly Stone, and he started the story off with, this one time, man, Miles walked in the room and pulled a gun on everybody.
In the whole room.
What?
For 8 years, I taught music composition lessons to Tony Williams.
Wow.
You
taught Tony Williams.
I'm in all these encyclopedias of jazz because Tony took lessons from me for 8 years.
Wow.
And he started lessons. He wanted, he was a drummer. And he born in Chicago.
We're all frustrated piano players.
Grew up in Boston, went on the road at 16, never finished high school. Mm-hmm. As a drummer, he always felt like he was a lesser musician. Well, he played the drums the way a conductor conducts an orchestra, but that, he just felt inadequate.
Yeah.
And so we started from the beginning, and he got the equivalent of a full undergraduate education from me. And I was always milking him for stories. And, he was with Miles Davis when he was 16, a kid.
Yeah.
He was just a kid. And he told just hysterical stories.
He knows what he saw.
Stories. And at one point, Tony bought himself a Ferrari. He'd been driving a BMW, but he said, Miles had a Ferrari. I always want a Ferrari. So he got himself a Ferrari. I don't know when this was. This would have been about 83, 84. Drives up to my place in Berkeley in a Ferrari. Bad neighborhood in Berkeley. He spent the whole lesson yelling out the window, get away from that car, get away from there. He used to tell the story about Miles and his Ferrari. And he said he just drove like a madman. Like a madman. And Tony drove like a crazy person. I said, worse than you? He goes, oh, no, way worse than me, man. I said, what'd you say to him? He said, Miles, man, you're scaring the crap out of me. Miles said to him, I'm in here too, Tony. I'm in here too. As if that was supposed to make it okay. That's why I said, just close this. I said, yes, Miles, you're in here too. Yes.
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yep.
Yeah.
Where can we see you play piano?
You'd have to come to my house and sneak downstairs.
We're not going to catch you at the Starry Plow.
No, I wish. I'm just a hobbyist at this point, and I'm a good hobbyist. And every now and then I'll play something on one of these great courses. They set me up with a piano, and I do need to play musical examples.
Yeah.
But the stuff that I really play, which is jazz, I don't have a context for anymore. And I do miss that. But I have a good time by myself. And I play for all my friends, and we have parties and fundraisers, and I'll play for fundraisers and such. So that's where.
Okay.
Well, you ought to come down here sometime when they do one of their jam sessions and grab that Dwayne Way over there. You can be a Dwayne Way artist and play on the keyboard when they're playing. Are you going to bring the mustache back?
No. No, it's nice of you to ask. Well, this is one of the odd things about doing media, and I didn't appreciate it until I did it myself. We're talking about Bill Shatner, perfect example. Okay, I grew up watching those Star Trek shows. It was only on for 3 years, but I was addicted to them, and I think it was 64 to 67, or 65 to 68, but that was the original run. Well, we know what William Shatner looks like because he's still out there looking the way he looked 50 years ago.
More or less, yeah.
He don't look that way anymore. I mean, he's trying, but he doesn't look that way anymore. And, now that there are these videotapes of me out there with this mustache from 93, I made my first course, and I shaved the mustache in 2003. So 10 years worth of courses have this mustache. Well, people still say to me, what happened to the mustache? I said, it's been gone for 11 years, for God's sake. But you freeze in time.
You do.
You freeze in time. And it isn't true. I grew the mustache when I was 20 because I had a baby face. Drinking age in New Jersey at the time was 18. And so all these girls would come up to campus to drink and find a guy. And I would tell them I'm a junior, and they wouldn't believe me. Now you're a freshman. Then I'd pull out my ID and just show them I was a junior. That's a fake ID.
Yeah.
So I figured I got to make myself look older. So I grew the mustache to make myself look older. And then lo and behold, December of 2003, a few months before I turned 50, I look at the mustache. The mustache is making me look way freaking older.
Right.
Yeah, this is a young, more youthful, cleaner.
Yeah, it's getting gray, and the hairs are sticking out into my nose, and the nose hairs are getting lost in the mustache. And
Things are misbehaving.
Yeah, I'm saying, I don't need to look older anymore. I need whatever help I can get. I shaved that puppy right off.
But here again, we're talking about a guy who was in his junior year at Princeton on top of the musical food chain, and he's just trying to get chicks.
It's all, yeah. Now, I'm going to tell you who I'm really learning from right now. I have 4 kids. I have 2 grown-up kids, a 28-year-old daughter and a 25-year-old son. And then I have an 8-year-old and a 6-year-old.
Wow.
My 6-year-old son is not just beautiful and blonde, but he is smoother with women than anyone named Greenberg has ever been. At the age of 4, he already figured out. He would look the ladies up and down, and he'd say, I really, really like your shoes.
Yes.
And they would look at him, and then they'd look at me and say, when will he be 16?
He's killing them.
Had I ever thought of that line in my whole life? I like your shoes.
Yeah.
Never.
Wow.
And here I'm learning it at 58 when it's too late. It's
not too late. You have an 8 and a 6-year-old.
I know I do.
What is too late?
Well, let's just say that I'm not on the singles market, so I could try that line on my wife, but she'll just shrug her shoulders.
She doesn't
and say,
fall for it.
Yeah, no, right, exactly.
I thought it was just me.
Yeah, no.
It doesn't matter. Like B.B. King did a show. I was with my girl, and he said, "Grab some wine, get in the bathtub, play Willie Nelson." And so we did, because B.B. King said so, and he was right.
Okay.
What do you think about Willie Nelson?
I have no thoughts whatsoever. Everything I hear is fine, but it's not music I've pursued.
Right.
No. There's so much stuff out there that there's just
there's just some things that you've missed.
There's just no time.
Sure.
Exactly. And one thing I've learned to stop doing, that we all do when we're younger, is we often define, in fact, as often as not, we define ourselves by what we don't like as what we do like, right? I hate this French music. It's just a pile of crap. Blah, 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 blah. And you learn the prejudices of your own teachers, and then you parrot them because, it's like children growing up. You know? First there's your parents, and whatever your parents think is what you think until you need to reject them and become your own person. It's the same thing if you're a musician. You've had a mentorship with all your teachers.
Right.
And so first you have to buy into everything they say, and then you have to reject everything they say. And part of that is being negative. I'm not negative about anything anymore.
Yeah.
About what I don't like. Because, frankly, I rarely hear anything that isn't interesting. There's always something to steal. There's always something to take. There's something to learn from everything. It doesn't mean I'm going to surround myself with it. It doesn't mean I'm going to spend hours doing it. But I think that a lot of the stuff I watch now on YouTube, if I've got some time, I'm just like everybody else. I want to see what's going on. I'm fascinated by Miley Cyrus's tongue.
I wonder if my fascination about it is the same.
Well, the point is that these are performance-oriented people,
yes,
who will do whatever is necessary to grab your attention.
Create some.
But she's not untalented, and I'm fascinated by it. I'm not going to surround myself with it, but I'm fascinated by it.
Yeah.
So, if I don't know of someone, it's not because, at this point in my life, it's not because I avoid it. It's just because I've never had someone show me how to listen to it.
Okay. I'm going to give Pete the last question, but here's my last question. If you could choose a contemporary band to commission you to write them a performance, who would it be?
The Chicago Symphony Orchestra.
Chicago Symphony Orchestra.
I know you meant a band, but I'm changing the question very slightly.
Change the rules, man. It's your show.
Yeah, right. Yeah. The CSO. Those people can play. Oh my goodness.
Is there something about Chicago? Do you think it's the cold or the something? What is there a factor about Chicago that makes it such a rich musical town?
Yeah, partly it's the building. It's the tradition of great conductors they've had there, and then the tradition of players. It's like the University of Alabama football team. It's like, the Yankees. You have such a tradition of success that it tends to attract the best players. People want to be in that town. They want to play with this band.
Right.
The Chicago brass is second to none. And the sound of massed brass is aural with an A, sex, A-U-R-A-L. That's a new phrase. I think I should write a piece called Oral Sex. Yes.
Another one on our show. We break out new words all the time here.
There you go. So I would love to write for a big, great orchestra. You know, when you're a modern composer, unfortunately, what you write is chamber music or vocal music, songs. Right. And that's what I write. I haven't written an orchestral piece. I wrote my second piano concerto back in 95, and it was premiered in 2000. It beautifully played. But when do you ever have a chance to hear the big sound? And there's nothing more seductive than writing for an orchestra and hearing it. It's so fantastic. So Chicago, I wouldn't be unhappy with San Francisco, but I wouldn't keep my fingers crossed on that one.
So my question is, from the composers from back in their time, whoever, Puccini, Mozart, it doesn't matter. When they see, if they were here in this room and they see modern instruments, which one are they most like, I have to get my hands on the whatever, you know, a Roland 808? Is it an electric guitar? What do they want to see? What do they want to play? Because, you know, a lot for Bach, I mean, the instruments got so much better across the board. And we may not violins and that kind of thing, but pianos.
You know, that's a really interesting question. But, of course, Bach did play the piano, didn't like it at all. Because the pianos of his time, right, he found them stiff, unresponsive, not terribly sonorous. And he gave a lot of feedback to a local piano maker, a guy who also built organs named Gottfried Silbermann. And Silbermann actually improved his instruments considerably based on Bach's advice and criticism. You know, it would be fascinating to see how Bach would react to a full concert grand piano. He probably wouldn't like it at all. The keys are much wider than the harpsichord keys he was accustomed to playing. Those were much smaller instruments. They were like Casios in terms of the size of the keys.
Yeah.
But he would have to address the instrument very differently. Playing from the wrist doesn't work on a modern piano. You'll only hurt your wrist. You have to play from your back and your butt and your shoulders. You have to use your whole body on it. So these are good questions. I don't know if Bach is a good example. Beethoven would be interesting. Beethoven always wanted bigger pianos. So he was always demanding bigger pianos and writing for pianos that really, in theory, didn't exist yet. If you look at the kind of chords he wrote and how long he asked things to be sustained for, there were no contemporary instruments that could sustain the way he was indicating. He very often wrote for notes that didn't exist yet. And he would say, well, sooner or later someone will be able to play that because pianos keep getting bigger. So sooner or later, that note's going to be there.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's
we don't give him credit for that kind of foresight.
Oh, you know, the Beethoven and the piano, you know, that was his axe. That and the organ, that's what he played. And he played the organ as a young man. And I'm convinced that the organ preconditioned everything he heard because he wanted his pianos to have that same sonority, that same power, that same punch, that same range as these big pipe organs. And so he beat the living daylights out of these pianos, which, when he was young, were made out of balsa wood and dental floss. Yeah. They just fell apart under his hands. But Beethoven's career corresponds exactly with the growth of the piano from a small harpsichord-like instrument to a metal-harped instrument. That is, instead of wooden harps, metal harps that could accommodate much more tension, much thicker strings, and much more sonority.
And much more force.
Correct. Although he was deaf by the time they came out, he still beat the living daylights out of these pianos, claiming he could hear them through his fingers, through his bones, which he probably could. So I think Beethoven would be fascinated by a modern grand. I'd be curious to see what he would do with one. It'd take him a while to get used to it. I mean, he'd need some time.
Sure.
But it would be interesting to see what he would do with it. Because it's much closer to his ideal than the pianos of his day.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
To be that far ahead. Dwayne's that far ahead in fashion. Sly is too.
Right.
But, man.
You know what? I definitely want to be respectful of your time, although I could do this all night, which, you know, I wish we could roll a bar in here and pour some drinks and do this
We'll do
endlessly.
it again. We'll do it again.
You know what? I would love to do it again because this is what I'd like to do. I'm going to take your suggestions that you made earlier for the romantic pieces and the more tragic pieces, and then get to know them, and then Pete and I will debate them and form some opinions about them, and then we'll come back and we'll do maybe a show where we, analyze them in front of you, and you can see how we've grown.
Or play some music, and then we can talk about what you're hearing.
Yeah.
That'd be fine.
That'd
be great.
That'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah, actually have the music present.
That'd be great.
Well, this has been a tremendous pleasure, although I kind of think I don't yet know how much of a pleasure this has been. And as I reflect on it over the next who knows how long, I'm going to think, man, I didn't realize what we did that afternoon.
Oh, this is good.
So thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
All right.
You can find more of Dr. Bob's work at robertgreenbergmusic.com or check out his terrific and vast lecture series at thegreatcourses.com. But I really encourage you to watch his show, Scandalous Overtures, at aura.tv. And there are a lot of good shows on that site. We appreciate you listening. We hope you like it, and we look forward to your feedback at breakitdownshow.com. We answer all of your messages. So if you want to support us, keep listening, tell your friends, and break us off some 5-star written reviews on iTunes and Stitcher. Do that for us and email us a screenshot of your awesome review, and we'll mention you on the show and shoot you out a Break It Down Show bumper sticker or something. We don't know what yet, but we got a new logo and we're getting some new swag, and we want to share it with everybody. We really do appreciate it. So for Dr. Bob and for Pete, this is John saying thanks for listening, and we'll make more.